Hello, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great, Sergey. How are you? Thank you for putting me on your show. Although I've been watching your videos, and a lot of them are about life and death and after-death experiences. And I was curious what you wanted to talk to me about.
You've been locked up for no reason. I know that. First of all, I would like to know what were your feelings when you got back from prison, when you tasted the freedom again, like your first day. If you can describe me your first day when you got out.
So let's start with the day that I was released. They basically they told me because I was in Petersburg, Virginia, they could put me on a bus and they would pay for it to bring me back to Pittsburgh, or they would be willing to drop me off at the airport if somebody would get me a plane ticket. So I called my mom and she got me a plane ticket, and they literally drove me from the prison to the curb at the airport and said, "See ya." And when I got out of the car and went in the airport, it was extremely surreal. I felt uneasy, almost like, am I supposed to be here? The airport was actually very quiet. There wasn't a lot going on, and I had to go through security. I had to go through TSA security, and I know all I had for an ID was a federal prison ID, which they told me that would work. And I was nervous as hell going through security, but they looked at it, gave it back to me, let me go through security because that's a federal ID. Very, very strange, very surreal. I probably didn't really feel free until my mom and my stepdad picked me up at the airport. They took me to Wendy's to get something to eat. And then they had to take me to the halfway house and drop me off. And then I was at the halfway house for like 32 days. I'm going to tell you, I probably still didn't feel free until after I finally got to come home 32 days later. And once I came home and got to sit in my desk, in my chair, same chair that I had when I left, until I sat down in this chair, I really didn't feel free. Once I sat down in this chair, I felt free again. Now, that's when reality sets in. And what I mean by that is all of the stresses and hardships that go on when you run a business and you have employees and you have customers and you have money that you have to make and you have bills you have to pay, they all flooded back to me within probably 24 hours. Whereas the whole 4.5 years I was gone, it was so distant. I dealt with it, but it was so distant. It wasn't right there in the forefront. I'm going to tell you from that perspective, I actually felt freer while I was locked up.
I know, because you had all the privileges over there. Tell me what kind of job you had over there.
Really, all the freedom, as long as you stayed on the compound, you could walk around, you could go anywhere, you could read books, you can talk with people, you can play games with friends, you can do all kinds of things. You can work out, but you don't have to pay any bills. After that 24 hours, and I realized the mess that had become of my business, my family, my dad was in a nursing home, my home, my girlfriend had left me, my home was empty. I literally spent a couple days crying on my couch, wondering if maybe I would have been better off if I didn't come home and if I was still there. And I hate to say that because I'm a positive kind of person, and you know that about me. I've always been a positive person. But there were some really dark days after I came home where I now understand why a lot of people either A, commit a crime on purpose so that they can go back, or B, have this problem when it comes time to coming home. I didn't really have a problem when it came time to coming home. I wanted to come home really bad. But once I was here, I then found myself longing for being back there, where all my friends were, where I was associated with a whole group of people, where I had almost a better purpose.
Yeah, all our millionaire friends. I said all our millionaire friends.
Yes, yeah, I guess that helps having a bunch of millionaire friends.
Yeah.
And then you come home to reality and there's no millionaire friends around you. So yes, that made a huge difference. Definitely made a huge difference. It took, I would say, months to overcome that. I know my secretary, she, because I mask things pretty well, she was like, Mike, I can't believe it. Because like by the next day, she was like, you're barking out orders and doing stuff in the office and organizing things like you never missed a beat. You're running the software like you've been working here for years. Well, because I was still in my mind. But internally, my emotions were really ravaged for a while. And it took a long time for me to come to grips with the fact that I was home and I was home to stay. And I guess, how do you define freedom? Because you come home, you're on probation. You have to report to a probation officer. You have to follow their rules. You're very, very nervous at first because you don't want to do anything that could risk you going back. And by anything, you start thinking like, can I go home after 9 tonight? What happens if I accidentally roll through this stop sign? Am I going to go back? What happens if somebody's yelling at me, a customer, and I yell back and they call the police? Am I going to get like every little thing goes through your head, which is not really free. I feel free now because there's no probation. That's all behind me. I'm not doing anything illegal. So I definitely feel very free now. But for a long time, it was difficult coming home to actually feel free, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it answers the question in a way, but I was expecting something else. I was expecting you to feel that elation and all that change, because before you got out, you were sent to Atlanta for 6 months. And can you describe that experience over there?
Yeah, so basically I wasn't in Atlanta for the whole 6 months, but they sent me on Con Air. They had a mock hearing in West Virginia where they found me guilty of having a cell phone, but there was no cell phone and there was no evidence of a cell phone. It was just somebody telling them that I had a cell phone, and it turned out it was a person that was at my office that was robbing me, and they didn't want me to come home so that they could rob me some more. So the prison actually facilitated them to rob me. They robbed me of almost $1 million while I was locked up due to the basic incompetence of the prison staff. So I had filed an appeal, but the appeal procedure takes a while. And they were mad that I filed the appeal. So they sent me on Con Air, and they sent me on Con Air. You get on a plane, you go to South Dakota, and then I went to Kansas, and then I ended up in Oklahoma City, where I was there for maybe a week, which is their main it's their main transit area for all federal prisoners. Then from there, they sent me to Atlanta, which is like a temporary holding facility, and Atlanta is dirty and nasty, not what I was used to, and I was there about 3 weeks. And then they finally sent me to my final destination, which was Petersburg, Virginia. And in Petersburg, not bad. Some parts of it were nicer than where I was in West Virginia. Some parts of it weren't. Not surrounded by as many millionaires like I was before. But generally surrounded by some decent people, some more bad people. But some of the qualities of the facility were better, like the food was a lot better. The library and things like that were a lot better. The tennis courts. We had air conditioning. West Virginia had no air conditioning. So there were some parts of the facility that were better, but the quality of people was not good. Didn't really affect my psyche because I knew either way, whether they continued this process with finding me guilty for the cell phone, I only had 6 months left. Or if I got my appeal and I won my appeal, I would immediately be released, which is what happened. When I actually got to have my appeal, and they do it right there in the prison at Petersburg. They have like a little courtroom you go into, and there's a judge. And I remember when I went in there, the first thing he did was he had looked over the case information, and he said, Mr. Staaf, how do you plead? I said, not guilty, Your Honor, and I have a prepared statement. And he said, yeah, I don't need to hear it. That's exactly what happened in West Virginia. And I said, wait a second, Your Honor, I thought I was going to be heard. And because now I'm getting mad. I don't want to get railroaded again. And he said, Mr. Staaf, sometimes you need to know when to just be quiet. And I said, but Your Honor, I was under the impression I would be heard. And he said, please approach the bench. So I approached the bench. And at this point, I'm thinking, they just screwed me again, another 6 months. And he said, Mr. Staaf, I'm sorry for what happened to you in West Virginia. That was a mock trial in a mock court. You should not have been found guilty. You should not be here. You should be at home. And I will be releasing you. You go home tomorrow. And he put his hand out and he said, I'm sorry, sir. And I shook hands. And at that point, I broke down. Sergey, I started crying. Because that's when I realized, finally going home. And then he immediately directed me to administration, where I got to call my mom. And I had to make the decision right there on the spot. Am I getting an airplane ticket or am I getting a bus? Because at 7 o'clock in the morning, they're throwing me out. But, you know, I got to have some way to Pittsburgh.
Get out of here.
Basically what happened. Yeah, at 7 in the morning, that trial was at like noon, and at 7 in the morning, I was out.
Yeah.
So it was a really good feeling. It was a really good feeling. That was probably the elation that you're talking about. That elation existed while I was still in there, because I felt the exuberance of 4.5 years of being not free finally coming to an end. Not the actual coming home. Came home to an empty house, a company that was almost bankrupt, literally utility shutoffs on the door, my dad in a nursing home, my kids not talking to me. It was pretty tough. And it was enough things that it really wanted me to go back, because at least back there I didn't have to deal with or see any of that, and I had a group of friends around me. It was honestly more relaxing. And I've heard that from a lot of businessmen.
Yeah, but we have to mention here for the viewers and for the listeners that you have been doing your time in a camp.
Camp Cupcake.
What is that?
Club Fed.
Club Fed.
Club Fed, although I think at Morgantown they called it Camp Cupcake. I think it's what the guards named it, Camp Cupcake. It was a really nice facility with a beautiful church, a beautiful duck pond, a stream that cut through the property with 2 bridges that went across, a little nature trail, a big soccer field, a running track that actually went up through the woods and through a field. The housing units were kind of like open bunk style, almost like we were in the military, with our own cubicle with a window and a desk and a cabinet, and basically a really good group of guys that at one point or another they messed up something in their life and got held to an extreme level of accountability that a lot of people don't realize. Probably, I would say at least half of those people that I knew, if any person in the United States was held to the same level of accountability, they'd be inside. Like every single person. But the prosecutors pick and choose who they're going after for whatever reason, usually a political agenda. And these people are put in there for one thing they did wrong out of many, many, many things that they might have done right. And that's how they end up in there. I mean, my housing unit alone held 320 people, and we probably had 30 doctors, some that were surgeons, at least 40 lawyers, at least 20 investment bankers, at least 30 real estate guys. I remember when I first showed up there, there was a black guy leaning up against the, sitting on the front porch, leaning up against the pole. And I can't remember his name right now, but I was scared to death, first day of prison.
Yeah.
And I'm carrying all the stuff. I'm carrying my pillow, my blanket, and all the stuff they gave me, and I've got this uniform. And I go up there and I said, "Hey, is this Alex's unit?" And he says, "Yeah, what are you here for? You're what kind of business are you in?" And I said, "How do you know I was in business?" And he goes, "Come on, man." And so I said, "I was in real estate." And he goes, "Well, let me take you in and introduce you to the real estate guys." And I was like, "There's real estate guys here?" And in about a half hour, he had introduced me to 10 millionaires that were all in the real estate business. And I was like, holy cow. And I remember telling my dad at the first visitation, because he was really worried about me. And I said, "Dad, I would have paid money to meet some of these people in my previous life. In fact, let me introduce you to a few people." And I introduced him to the ex-director of NASA, the ex-president of the United Auto Workers, an ex-senator from New Jersey. They were all in the visiting room at the same time I was. And my dad was like, "Wait a second. You're in here with these guys? Oh, and I was like, oh, wait, and this is my doctor friend from South Carolina. He's a doctor, or at least he was. And so I think it gave my dad a level of comfort, and it actually gave me a level of comfort because it was a great group of guys. Probably the worst part about being away was being away from my family, my loved ones, my girlfriend, and my business. If I didn't have those things, I frankly would have loved it there. And then there's people from all walks of life because you have the drug dealers there too. And what was funny about the drug dealers to me, it actually, sometimes their stories made me cry because a lot of these guys, they really just wanted to have a successful business. But our country's education system failed them. And the only thing they knew to have a business was to sell drugs. And they were soaking up being around all these businessmen because all they wanted to do was learn business. They wanted to be legitimate business people, and many of them were very smart. But our education system here failed them.
Yeah, let's tell our viewers and our listeners, just in short, what you've been locked up for.
So I'll give you a brief synopsis. I'm a real estate guy. I'm a real estate investor. I'm a real estate broker. I had a successful real estate brokerage, and I bought a lot of rental properties over the years. And I'm a landlord. I'm a professional landlord, and I had a whole staff of people working for me doing that. And we got into that period of time. It was like 2006, 2007, when everybody was buying houses. It was the mortgage boom, and we were losing a lot of tenants because they were buying houses. And we were filling them just as fast because we had nice units. But my staff came to me and they were like, hey, you're a real estate broker and you don't sell houses. And all of these tenants love you and they've been asking you, can you sell them a house? And honestly, Sergey, I was burned out of selling. And because I started my career that way, I didn't want to sell houses anymore. I was burned out by it. I had cut my teeth on it when I was younger. It's a very stressful business. It's very cutthroat. People do a lot of illegal things and steal your clients and do all kinds of dirty, underhanded things. And I didn't like it. I didn't want to do it anymore. So I had resisted. Well, they kind of convinced me that I should try it. And I had a tenant that really just wanted me to sell them a house. So I had the real estate license. I sold them a house. And you know what? When I didn't have to depend on it for a living anymore, and so I didn't have to participate in any of the politics that go on with other realtors, it was actually fun. I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed getting this guy his home. But I ran into a problem. Because I hadn't sold for a long time, when I called up my mortgage friends to get these people a loan for the house, none of them were in the business anymore. And I didn't have any contacts. And I ended up calling another real estate broker that I knew. And I asked him, hey, who are you using for mortgages anymore? And he said, my own company. You don't have a mortgage license? And I said, no, why? Should I? And he said, Mike, let me send this guy down. And he'll help you out, but you got to talk to him. I said, okay. So he sends his kid down. And I say kid, I was in my probably late 30s, but he was probably in his late 20s. And he's driving a really nice sports car. And at this point in my life, I was doing very, very well financially. I had an airplane. Like I said, I was a landlord. I had hundreds of units. But I had to work my ass off to keep it all together. This kid pulls up in this sports car, and I start talking to him. He's the mortgage guy. He does the loan for my customer. And I asked him, I said, well, what else do you do? He goes, just mortgages. And I said, well, what kind of money do you make? This kid was making more than I was. And I had a team of like 30 people. They have all kinds of maintenance problems all the time. I'm renting and leasing apartments and doing move-ins and all. And this kid, all he's doing is mortgages, and he was making more than me. And I said, are you serious? And he said, dude, it's the wave of the future. So I decided to get my mortgage license. And I did. And the problem was, because I never worked in that industry, getting the license was easy because I had a real estate brokerage. Actually doing loans was another story because I didn't know how to do them. So I tried hiring somebody to work for me. And I went through several people. The problem is when you're in the middle of a mortgage boom, nobody wants to leave where they're at because they're already making so much money that they're afraid to lose their customer base. The only ones that want to leave are the ones that don't know what the hell they're doing. And they weren't going to help me. So I eventually, through a guy I fly with, met a man that they said he is a great mortgage guy. He will set up your whole company. But the problem is he's a drug addict, but he's recovering. And I said, well, what do you mean he's a drug addict? Because I honestly, I'm a clean kind of person. I never dealt with that before. So I met this guy, and they said he was a recovering crack addict. I met him at a restaurant. He wore a suit and tie, extremely professional looking. I'm not going to say his name on the air, but everybody who knows me knows who he is. He professed to know the mortgage business inside and out. And he really, really did. And I said, well, why do you not start your own? Because that seems to be what the natural curve was. And he said, well, I have a felony. And I said, what's it for? He said, drug possession. Well, the felony prevents him from starting his own, which that's a whole nother topic, by the way, that will probably go on in another show. They prevent people from moving on with their life, which I don't think is a fair system. But anyhow, he ended up working a deal with me. He promised me that he was clean off of the drugs. And I ended up having to work a deal where I gave him 75% of the earnings of this mortgage company just to get it off the ground. And he was going to teach me the business. Oh, I had to pay all the expenses too and provide him an office to work in. And he was going to show me how to run the business and show me how to bring other people in, which when I brought other people in, I could do a more normal split so I could make a profit. That was our deal. That was our arrangement. He performed on one part of the arrangement. He set up the business, and he set it up quickly, and it was operational, and pretty soon he was doing loans. He brought his own loans, and he was then doing the loans for anybody that I sold a house for. And I started then selling a lot of houses, and he then was doing every single loan. The problem was he never stood up for teaching others how to do the business, teaching me how to do the business. And here's where it went sideways, Serge. The first evidence of fraud that I found was I got a call from Countrywide Bank. And Countrywide, for those who don't know, was a big mortgage lender in the United States. At that time, it was one of the biggest. And the funny thing is, they were found guilty of committing all kinds of fraud, and they went bankrupt. And then the CEO of the company was hired by the Obama administration to head up the mortgage task force, which makes very little sense to me. So, so it's Countrywide Bank. Our account rep called, and they wanted to talk to me. I didn't even know this guy. I talked to him, and he says, hey, you know the Millers that you're selling a house to, and your mortgage company's doing the loan? I said, yeah. He said, well, your mortgage rep sent us tax returns that are fraudulent. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, apparently he took the tax return and he changed all of the numbers on the tax return and then made a photocopy it and sent it in. I said, how do you know that? And he said, well, he sent us the original that he changed and not the photocopy. I was like, oh my God. Yeah. I said, all right, well, I understand. I said, I will get to the bottom of this, and I'm assuming the Miller's loan is dead. Here was my first taste of this industry, Sergey. The guy said, no, the loan's not dead. I said, what do you mean? He said, I made a copy of the tax return and fixed the file, and I threw away the fraudulent one. Just make sure you talk to your rep so he doesn't send us the screwed up one again. The loan's still closing next Wednesday. When I hung up the phone, I sat there in my office for a minute because I was stunned at what had just happened. So then I went and talked to my guy, and I said, hey, what the hell's going on? And he said, this is common in this business. It happens all the time. I said, well, I don't want this happening anymore. And he goes, well, did the loan close? I said, yeah. He said it's closing, but I don't want this happening anymore. We have enough business. We don't have to do that. Well, that happened like 3 or 4 more times, similar type situations. And unfortunately, I never did anything about it. It was the same kind of thing. I talked with my guy, yelled at him. A couple times I got very aggressive with him, told him not to do that anymore. He then promised me that he wouldn't. We argued about it, and then it happened again. After about 3 years of running the business that way, and really for 3 years now, he made 75% of the income. I didn't make anything other than I'm selling houses, so I get my real estate commission, but I'm not getting anything from the mortgage side. My other business is still running, but it was starting to get frustrating with this guy, and his drug addiction returned. He'd been in and out of rehab a couple times. So I had a bank exam by the state. When you have a mortgage license, you have to go through a bank exam every year. And the state of Pennsylvania, the first 2 years, they did my bank exam with him. I didn't even attend it. So I didn't even know who the guy was, and it had nothing to do with it. Well, this third year, the guy wanted to talk to me without my rep. And so I immediately asked my guy, what did you do? Like, why does he want to talk to me? And he kept saying, I don't know. And I said, well, he wants to talk to me alone. So I'd like to know, what did you do? When I go in there, the guy introduces himself to me. And he has this long sheet of paper. When I say long, it was like this long. And it was like a tractor feed, and it was all unfolded. And then he had his laptop open, and he flipped his laptop around, and it had a folder that said fraud investigation. And then he flipped it back around, and he said, did you see that? And I said, yes. What's going on? Am I under investigation? And he said, well, it all depends on how willing you are to work with us on this. And I said, well, what's going on? He then pulled out this paper, and he shows the rap sheet of the guy that's working for me running my mortgage company. And there's probably like 80 things on it. And some of them are as dumb as stealing hot dogs from a grocery store. He got arrested for that. Okay? Stealing hot dogs. Some of them are drug possessions, a lot of drug possessions. Some of them are felony type driving violations, where he wrecked into somebody and then drove away. Some of them were kiting checks. Some of them were stealing checks from previous employers and then writing them out to himself. There's a huge list of things. Now, the guy said, why did you hire this guy and put him in charge of your mortgage company? And he basically then also pulled out another sheet that was like this big. And he said, I ran a background check on your real estate company and all the people that work for you. Not a record on any of them, including yourself. Nothing. Squeaky clean. He said, but you have this guy with this huge arrest record running a financial services company. Why did you do that? I really didn't have an answer. I told him because I couldn't find anybody else. And he said, well, maybe it was better to not have anybody than to have this person. And I said, well, what's going to happen to me? And he said, what we have here is some light fraud. It looks like your guy has changed some tax returns, changed some W-2s and pay stubs on some people. It's not enough for the state of Pennsylvania to prosecute, but we want him out of the industry. We've been wanting him out of the industry for a while. We were close to getting him at the last mortgage company he worked for, and then he quit and came and worked for you. And the first 2 years you passed your bank exam, but this year I found some stuff. And I said, so what do you want me to do? He said, if you can assure me right now that this is not your policy and that you're going to get rid of him and that in the future you're going to vet employees at this mortgage company, I will reissue your banking license. But he has to be gone today no more loans. I said, well, there's like 20 loans in our pipeline. He said, he can't work on those. Done. I said, okay, that's all I got to do? He said, yes. I shook hands with him. He issued my banking license on the spot. And then I went in and proceeded to fire my guy, who got into a huge fight with me because he didn't want to leave. And he owed me a whole bunch of money. And he said, what about the money that I owe you? I said, well, I don't know. At this point, you have to leave. I'm not getting in trouble for your actions. I've been warning you about this for years, and I'm done with it. What I didn't know is he was working for the feds. He already was working for them. He had gotten in trouble in another drug sting, and he promised them he could bring them me. Me firing him kind of ended that. So he then started calling me under their direction. And he called me 3 or 4 times. At first, I wouldn't take his call because when I went back to the mortgage office to look, to try to figure out how to close his loans, his files were a disaster. The computer was locked out with a password that I couldn't get in, and I had to call our computer IT company to break into his computer, which took a couple weeks because he wouldn't give me the password. I couldn't access anybody's files. They all started turning on me because the loans weren't closing, and I had sold them houses, and they couldn't buy the houses because their loan wasn't getting done. So everybody started getting angry with me. In the meantime, he was calling me to apologize. And the first couple times I wouldn't take his call. But finally, one night, he called me, and I answered the phone, and I said, what do you want? And he said, did you see that Steeler game Sunday? Oh, I like the Steelers. So I said, yeah. And he goes, what do you think about those 2 touchdowns Ben threw? I said, yeah, it was good. It was good. And he kind of loosened me up. And then he said, Mike, look, I just really want to apologize to you. Well, that hit me a nerve. I wanted an apology. I was expecting an apology. So he gave me this big, long apology and how he was so sorry at what he had done. And is there any way he could make it up to me? And I said, well, you could pay me back the money that you owe me. He said, how about if I come in the office and I show you how to close those loans, like I promised you 3 years ago? And I said, well, the guy from the States said you're not allowed here anymore. And he said, how about if I do it in the evening when nobody's around, or the weekend, and nobody will have to know? He said, you could close those loans. It'll fix everything. You can wipe the balance that I owe you. And I'll apologize again, and we'll all be friends. And what he said started to make sense to me, Sergey. So I agreed. Now here's where it got ugly. When he showed up, he came with his friend. His friend from high school. That's the way he was introduced. It was an undercover FBI agent. The friend from high school told me that he had to drive my guy because he lost his license in a DUI, which sounded very believable because this is the kind of guy he was. So he then proceeded to sit on my couch, and looking back in hindsight, he was interviewing me. I thought he was just a friend shooting the shit. And he proceeded to tell me, do you have any good stories about my buddy? Because he's a real crook. I'm surprised you hired him. I then answered those questions like I was talking to a friend. I made jokes and wisecracks about catching him committing fraud over the last 3 years. And he asked me point questions like, why didn't you call the police? And I made jokes like, why would I call the police? I'm not a cop. And I laughed about it, thought it was funny. And he laughed too. And then he made other pointed questions like, so were you aware that your license was in charge of him? And I said, yes, but I never thought, that. But in all of those questions, what I answered was that I was guilty of being a fellow conspirator to commit mortgage fraud. And they videotaped it, recorded it. And that was how they charged me. They charged me with conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud and wire fraud. And conspiracy in America, for a lot of people who don't know, is a very loose term that was made up to go after mafia figures. And basically what it was for is you had this mafia figure at the top that maybe would direct, say Sergey is his underling, and he directs Sergey to go kill somebody. But the mafia figure never actually does it. So they couldn't arrest him. So they created this law where they could tie him together as a conspirator with very loose evidence so that they could tie him directly to the crime of killing the person even though he didn't do it. And that was to get mafia people. Well, the mafia is pretty much dried up. So the American justice system has now turned this conspiracy charge on everybody else. They use it on drug offenders. They use it on white-collar crimes. They're actually using it against Donald Trump as a conspirator for the January 6th thing. They need very little evidence, almost no evidence, to call somebody a conspirator. They basically need a fellow conspirator to admit that you were in it with them, which is what they got from my mortgage guy. And they only need 2 people to be part of the conspiracy, but they can add people really easily. Anybody who participated in any function of the business becomes a conspirator. Even if you didn't know that it was going on, you become a conspirator. And that's how I was charged.
Okay, so you explained everything nicely about what happened. Let's get back to the topic of the show, which is freedom. How was your, in the morning, like let's say the night before you released, next day you're going to be released. How was your night before that? And how did you go in the morning? All these details.
That's funny because at Morgantown, when people were leaving, we always had a party, and then usually some of your best friends would get up in the morning and walk you down to the door to say goodbye to you, and it was like a big event. At Petersburg, they had a board, like you're saying, where they had people that were leaving. I never got put on it because I had this hearing, and then I was leaving the next day. So I did come back, and I told some of my friends that I won the hearing, and I was leaving in the morning. So we didn't even get to have a party or anything. I said goodbye to all of them. As far as sleeping goes, I'm going to be honest, I think I slept pretty good. I needed an alarm clock to wake up. Because the moment he said it was over, for me, it was over. Even though I was still there, the weight came off my shoulder. So the elation was then. It was immediate. Right there in the courtroom, it was over. So it didn't matter that I hadn't gone through the functions yet. In my brain, that was all just immaterial. It was going to happen. It was over. So the reason I could be so jubilant and happy is I knew my prospective end date. Knowing that means, to me, it's a burden off your shoulders. It's just a matter of going through the motions till you get to that end date. So it's just a function of time. But you actually know when it is. So it's no big deal anymore. Kind of like in Shawshank Redemption, you could crawl through shit if you know that freedom is on the other side.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter. You go through anything if you know that that's what's on the other side. I definitely came back a humbled and better person who was wiser. I think the echo that a lot of folks say when they go to federal prison is they can equate it to dying, but you're still alive. And here's what I mean by that. You get to see the behavior of all of those that were around you after you're gone, but you're still here. And it's because you're locked up. You get to see how they behave without you around, without you in their life, what they do, what they would normally do if you weren't there. And so it becomes extremely enlightening. People that you thought were your friends turn out they're not. People that you weren't sure whether you were friends turn out they are. It's a very enlightening situation to go through. And illumination is part of freedom, I think, because you have to be fully illuminated. For me, it also brought me closer to God, which I think was very illuminating to me, whereas I wasn't prior to that. I mean, I always believed, but I wasn't very enthusiastic about it.
Yeah.
And I think that experience, it definitely changed me in that way, which was good. It was illuminating to me. And any type of illumination is freedom.
Okay, let me ask you then my question. What's your definition of freedom?
There's a couple different definitions for freedom. So, the number one thing that comes to mind when somebody asks me about my personal freedom is flying in my airplane. I'm kind of up there in the sky. There's nobody around to tell me what to do. I can go anywhere I want. I can do anything I want. I am distant from everything, so I'm at peace with myself, my mind, with God. And I have nobody pulling and tugging at me in different directions. That to me is my freedom.
So for now, this is it. I usually ask my guests, do you guys have a book or you have a course or something, and they advertise it, but I don't think you have anything.
I don't have a book or a course yet. I'm working on it.
Okay.
but once I do, I'll plug it.
Definitely.
Right now, I would say you could check out michaelstaaf.com, and you can read a little bit about my background, my history, and any upcoming projects are going to be on there. I have my own YouTube channel that I'm working on, but we haven't released yet. And I have my own book that I'm working on, but again, it hasn't been completed yet. And thank you, Sergey, for having me on. I enjoy your show. I'm going to catch up on some of the other episodes, and I'd love to be back.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much, my friend. Thank you for watching About Freedom Show. I really appreciate you. Click on one of the videos below and don't forget to subscribe.